Hello my friends, I'm Jean-Michel Grosjeu and you are watching the 5th video in my opinion series. Opinion on games, opinion on storytelling and above all, opinion on the fusion of the two, which I call immersion games. These are very special games that immerse you in an imaginary world and allow you to experience extraordinary adventures from the inside as if you were there. And since the goal of my life is to promote this family of games, immersion games, here is my plan to convince you. In my first opinion video, I explain what these games are all about. I try to define what an immersion game is. In my second video, I show you how these games let you experience stories from the inside and in a very special way that novels or movies cannot recreate. Immersion games are an original medium for storytelling. In my third video, I give you some concrete examples so you know what we are talking about, and I show you a list of games that, in my opinion, deserve the immersion game label à la Jean-Michel Grosjeu because keep in mind that this is all very subjective. And finally, in my fourth video, I compare these games to role-playing games, which are normally considered to be the gold standard for storytelling in gaming. So, naturally, I felt compelled to show you that immersion games offer a unique perspective and a certain added value that role-playing games do not. And so, with this 5th video you are watching now, I'd like to move forward by answering a question that I'm often asked. Usually, on traditional board game channels, people say that a game has two sides. On one side, the mechanics, and on the other, the theme. And some games have very strong themes. So I often hear players say to me, "Hey, Jean-Michel Grosjeu, I play Mage Knight or Arcs, for example, and these are games with very strong themes. So, why don't you talk about them on your channel? Why, in your opinion, are they not immersion games? And what is the difference between a game with a strong theme and an immersion game?" First of all, I think we can say that 99% of the games you find in stores are Euro games. In other words, we are currently experiencing the golden age of Euro games. And the word Euro is because their big bang took place in the late 90s with the release of Catan and similar games, first German, then French. And it happens that these Euro games are very heavy on the mechanics side. These games are some kind of intellectual challenges where the theme doesn't really matter. Let's take one of the most famous of them, The Castles of Burgundy. It's a very good game, recognized worldwide, but let's face it, no one cares about its theme. You don't play the Castles of Burgundy to build castles in Burgundy, but rather to build collection, combos, and a nice engine that produces victory points. Now, you know me, and I'm sure you can tell from the tone of my voice that I'm not the biggest fan of these mechanism-based games. What I look for in board games are the ones that spark my imagination. Games that open up an imaginary world ready to welcome me and my friends. And sometimes, some of you come to me with their favorite game to play with, some famous Euro games with strong themes, like Mage Knight or Arcs, two games vastly renowned for their themes and rich universes. That's what I'm looking for, right? Well, no. A rich universe is not enough to make an immersion game. And many of these games with strong themes are actually Euro games whose mechanics lie hidden beneath a layer of theme. And I'm not saying these games are bad, of course not. They are excellent games, but they are not immersion games. And since the difference between a strong theme and immersion is often difficult to understand, I would like to use this video to clarify my point of view with two of the most famous examples, Arcs and Mage Knight. So, Arcs is a game by Colwerley published in 2024 by Leather Games, following a resounding Kickstarter campaign. It is illustrated by Kyle Ferrin, an artist to whom the game owes a lot. Just look at its characters and its background you want to explore. Arcs has everything it needs to be an immersion game. In Arcs, players take on the roles of leaders of great science fiction empires who must expand their power across the galaxy. As Yellow player, for example, I must build cities and military bases to exploit planets and build a fleet to defend my empire as well as attack my neighbors and conquer their territory. So, when it's my turn to play as a space dictator, I have plenty of available actions to control my empire. I can tax some cities I control to produce resources. I can build new ships in my military spaceports. I can move my ships and attack enemy fleets and cities. Then after battle, I can repair those same ships once damaged in preparation for the next conquest. And that's it. There are other more political actions, but you can see how all of this works. And I would say that this game, Arcs, have the perfect ingredients for an immersion game where as a player you step into the shoes of a space monarch. But that's where Colwerley, the game's designer, had a strange idea. In an interview for the game release, he said that he felt the need for an action selection system. If you really want to take a particular action, you have to fight for it. Those are his own words. And so, putting his words into action, he added action cards to the game, which become a mandatory tool whenever you want to perform a particular action. At the beginning of each turn, each player draws a hand of cards, and to perform a given action, he must play a card that bears that action. For example, if I play the construction card, I can either build a ship or a city or repair something. Okay, why not? But Colwerley adds another layer of gameplay to, as he puts it, earn the right to play actions. And that layer is a trick-taking game, a bit like spades or hearts. Each player has a hand of action cards. The first player, for example Yellow, plays a mobilization card to be able to move his ships. And as in a game of spades, the next player, red player, must follow suit. So, he must also play a mobilization card. Okay, there are more subtle rules than that, and my goal is not to explain all the rules of this game. And the red player, in fact, does have the option of playing something else, but keep in mind that if he does not follow suit, if he does not play a mobilization card, he will be penalized and will not be able to do much on the board. Then, when everyone has played their turn, the player who played the highest card in the right color, mobilization, wins the trick. Just like in spades, and on the next turn he will play first. And that's good because if blue player intended to tax his cities to gain resources, now that he has the lead, he can play his low-value administration card, which allows him to tax. And you can see how this mechanics introduces a trick-taking logic in the heart of Arcs. If, for example, red player wants to launch a military campaign using his 2 aggression cards, he will need to keep the lead so he can play both cards in a row, and to do that, he must make sure that the 6th aggression card, the strongest card in the suit, has already been played. And then, just like in hearts or spades, he will count the cards, play a given suit to get rid of the high cards, and so on. And what's interesting is that, just as we were about to immerse ourselves in a world of space warfare between galactic superpowers, now our minds are cluttered with new problems to deal with. And why not after all? But problems coming from a world of spades game players. Abstract considerations such as who has the lead, what is the trump suit, has the 6 already been played, and that completely breaks the immersion. If I want to identify with an interstellar warlord, I expect to deal with issues of mobilization, production, conquest, alliances, betrayals, etc. And as soon as I realize that in order to attack the neighboring empire, the main skill I'm going to need is to be a good player of spades, it completely takes me out of my dream. It's as if in Star Wars, the rebellion and the empire settled the battle of the Death Star by playing cards. Another example to illustrate my point. Let's suppose it's yellow player's turn, he has the lead, he plays the card he wants, and he chooses to play this administration card not for the action it represents, at the moment he doesn't really need to tax or repair, but for the symbol at the bottom of the card, which allows him to declare an objective. He takes an objective token, the game calls it an ambition, and places it in the matching box. This particular box means that at the end of the round, the player with the most fuel and material resources will earn 5 victory points. And that is doubly annoying. First, because it links the very goal of the game, how to earn victory points, to the trick-taking mechanism. And that makes this mechanism even more important, even more present in the player's minds. And then it links the victory conditions, the character's objectives, not to their own nature or personal ambitions, but to their actual situation in the game. For example, if yellow player chooses this particular victory condition, it's probably because he already owns a lot of fuel or materials and is already ahead in terms of resource production. And that's annoying because if we want to believe in the story we are living, our empire leader should have a goal of his own, the goal of his life or his empire or his ideology. Not an opportunistic goal just because it suits him at that moment. Darth Vader doesn't think that because the Empire has produced a lot of fuel this year, he's going to suddenly forget his dreams of conquest and switch to the fuel business. And that's what makes Arcs not an immersive game but a Eurogame, a game based on mechanics. A game with a splendid universe, thanks to Kyle Ferrin, that you want to dive into, a game with a strong theme, but unfortunately, what matters in Immersion is not the quality of the universe or the theme, but the actions we will be led to take in it. And if we play cards instead of conquering the universe, well, it doesn't work. On the other side of the scale, we could put Space Empires, an excellent space conquest game, 100% immersion, but with a slightly blank or flat universe. And we find ourselves dreaming of the perfect game that Space Empire could have been with Kyle Ferrin's imagination. Now let's move on to our second example, Mage Knight, a game by Vlaada Chvátil, the famous author of Codenames and Through the Ages. And if I'm thinking of his game Mage Knight to illustrate my opinion video, it's because it's one of the games you mentioned the most in your comments. So here we are, it's time to talk about Mage Knight. At first glance, Mage Knight is a sandbox game. It's a fantasy universe that you can explore alone or with other players, cooperatively or competitively. You play a character and discover magic places, mysterious castles and ferocious monsters. And all of this is very similar to the famous Magic Realm that you've heard a lot about on my channel, or its modern version Dragon's Down, which are the champions of immersion gaming. So, what's the difference? Well, once again, the main difference between these games and what separates immersion from non-immersion is actions management. Let's tackle the problem head-on. What is the goal of an author designing an immersion game? His goal is to immerse players in an imaginary world. Players must believe in it, as if they were actually living in it. In Mage Knight or Magic Realm, the author's goal is for the player to really imagine themselves in the shoes of an adventurer in a fantasy land, setting out to explore and fight through 1,000 obstacles that will arise along the way. They must feel fear, hope, and triumph. To put it simply, this is the principle of immersive gaming. The more you believe in it, the stronger the thrill. So, naturally, the game designer starts from the beginning, from the basic premise. Characters can perform actions. They can walk, they can fight, they can carry items, they can talk to the people they meet. In short, these are the basic building blocks of their interaction with the world. Actions that may depend on their personal abilities or physical condition. Then the adventure begins and the character, the player, is facing obstacles. And then he has choices to make. How can he use his abilities and actions to overcome the obstacle? Basically, he combines his actions according to the game rules to come up with a strategy. And if the game is rich, there are plenty of possible strategies. But it's up to the player to choose. Or rather their character, since the player and the character are one and the same. And then, ultimately, it is reality that will decide how it all ends. And reality is the rules of the game that drive the situation's resolution. Of course, depending on the game, it can be more or less complex. It doesn't necessarily go well the first time around, so the character has to adapt, take other actions and so on, and in the end, all of this makes for a memorable adventure. And guess what? This simple pattern also applies to novels, comics and movies. It's not unique to board games. It's just a super classic basis for storytelling and bringing memorable adventures to life. So, Mage Knight, where does Mage Knight fit into all this? In this example, I start with my character at the bottom of a map to explore. In front of me, there is a magic tower, abandoned ruins, and 2 orcs troops patrolling the hill and the forest. There are ironclad orcs on the hill, tough guys, and simple prowlers in the forest, cooler guys. Okay, that's the situation I'm facing. So, what actions can I do as a character? At the beginning of the game, my character has 16 cards representing the 16 actions I'm able to do. But it turns out that Vladas Vatil, the game's designer, decided that at the beginning of each turn, the player draws 5 cards at random, and those will be the only 5 actions he will be able to perform during that part of the day. So that's weird. My character knows how to do lots of things, but for some inexplicable reason, he won't be able to fight much, for example, just because I only drew 1 combat card. Okay, let's go on. From there, what can I do? I'm not going to teach you the rules of this game, that's not the point of this video, but I'm sure you'll understand that's quite easy. Here are the movement codes for all types of terrain and the 3 magic dice that were rolled for this turn. So, with the March card, I have 2 movement points and I can move into the plain hexagon, which costs exactly 2 points. And from there I can attack the ironclad orcs, because to attack an orc's troop, you must be in an adjacent hexagon. Now, the problem is that monsters always attack first. So, before I can attack this orc, I must block the attack he's going to inflict on me. And I only have 1 card, Rage, that allows me to either attack or block. So, if I want to kill this orc with my attack, I won't be able to block and I have to suffer his damages. But that little red skull means he will inflict double damages on me. He is an ironclad orc, so he's made of metal, which hurts. To make it short, it's far too dangerous, so I don't do that. On the other hand, I have lots of movement cards. I could rush towards the other orc, who is easier to defeat. But If I pass right in front of the ironclad orc, he will attack me. That's how it is. Those are the rules of the game. So no, I cannot do that either. Eventually, the solution I choose is to go around by combining all my movement cards. It uses 2 magic dice, but I can summon them thanks to my mana card. That gives me a total of 8 movement points, which is enough to cross the plain 1, 2, 1, 2, and enter the forest 1, 2, 3. Then, if I want to attack the orc, I don't have to. I suffer 4 damage points, which is a lot, but then I can inflict 2 damage points plus 1 by engaging the last card by rotating it 90 degrees. Engaging a card always gives you a plus 1. That's a total of 3 damage points, enough to get rid of this orc. And voila, all my cards are discarded and the orc is eliminated. End of the turn. It was a bit long, but it was necessary for you to understand the kind of reasoning we use when playing Mage Knight. And that's why Mage Knight's game design can look like arcs, because both force you to act in a certain way. In Mage Knight, at the beginning of your turn, you randomly receive a small number of available actions, the 5 action cards drawn at random from 16. And from then, you are guaranteed that there will be no more randomness. From this point on, everything is 100% deterministic. And what you have to do, and this is all that will occupy your thoughts during your adventure, is to figure out how to combine these 5 cards to get the best result. In other words, the last step in our storytelling pattern is cancelled, even if it is the step where the unknown and the dramatic twists happen. The step where your sword breaks or where your arrow luckily hits the weak spot in the armor. The step where chance changes the hero's hopes and brings new problems. In Mage Knight, this stage doesn't exist and is replaced by a logic puzzle, an intellectual game. In Mage Knight, once you have drawn your 5 cards, you know the whole situation without any further surprises, good or bad, and it's up to you to optimize it. And instead of experiencing a memorable adventure, you solve a logic puzzle. Okay, so what's the conclusion? Well, remember the question we asked at the beginning. What is the difference between a game with a strong theme and an immersion game? We know plenty of games with strong themes, games with stunning graphics, or games that meet all the standards of a classic theme, fantasy, space opera, western, etc. Or even games based on a license. And there are also games that combine all that, creativity, graphic quality, and the writing of a near encyclopedia of the world in which we will play. But what I've tried to show you with this video is that all of that is great, but it's not enough to make an immersion game. That is, to give the player the illusion that they are really experiencing adventures inside an imaginary world. All the games you see here are ultimately Euro games, meaning games with mechanisms, intellectual puzzles with a nice theme as a backdrop. And what makes an immersion game? What suddenly draws in our imagination? What makes us really believe in it and remember it for a long time? Well, what creates this magic is simply the actual actions we take. As a knight in Magic Realm, we don't spend our time optimizing our action cards. No, we search for the lost city, we hide to avoid giant trolls, and we lose everything because of a moment of carelessness, hypnotized by riches and neglecting the danger of a giant octopus. In Space Empires, we will truly explore infinite space, set up bases, develop new technologies, and build a war fleet, all with the only purpose of conquering our enemy's empire. In Gunslinger, we attack a barn at night, setting it on fire to drive out Jesse James and his gang, and so on. In short, if there's one thing to remember from all this, it's that in a game, what matters is not what you say, but what you do. And for a game to be truly immersive, the player's actions must be the same as their character's actions. Then their objectives will be their own, as well as their hopes, victories and defeats. And then, yes, we can say that we feel immersed in an imaginary world. Voila, now you have it, but I feel compelled to point out one last time that this does not mean that immersion games are better than Eurogames. One can see this in the fact that thousands of Eurogames are released every year, while immersion games can be counted on the fingers of your hands. But as you know, I will always endlessly speak about immersion games because I, Jean-Michel Grosjeu, find in them what I look for in novels and movies. I find escape from reality and dozens of dream lives in imaginary worlds.